City hatchbacks aren't big business for car companies like they were 5 years ago. In that time, sales of these kind of cars have halved as SUVs become ever more popular. But that doesn't mean the category has fallen flat. In the last year, the top two sellers in Australia, the Suzuki Swift and the MG3, have been completely redesigned.
But can they take on the mainstay of the segment, the Volkswagen Polo? That has been a real favourite over the years. It's an oldie, but a goodie, I think. Can these two new ones take it on? Let's find out.
More than just three different cars, we have three different power sources on display here. We've got a petrol-only car in the Polo, a mild hybrid in the Suzuki, and a full hybrid in the MG as well. Now, all these cars are priced around $30,000 drive away, or thereabouts. Suzuki is just under that mark, as we're testing it today in this comparison. The Polo and the MG are about 32 grand drive away, depending on where you live and the special offers available at the time. It's safe to say 30 grand is the new 20 grand in the city car market, both as cars cost more to build through the COVID pandemic, as well as the more safety tech and convenience tech that buyers expect of these kind of cars in 2024. Right, let's check out the full price and specs. Value for money is critical in the city car class, but what we're looking for in this comparison is a blend of all attributes: interior space, technology, ease of use, driving performance, comfort, and of course, particularly important for what could be someone's first or last car, safety. All of these cars are priced around the $30,000 mark. At the time of testing, the Suzuki Swift Hybrid GLX was $29,490 drive away in all regions but northern New South Wales and Queensland, where it is $29,990 drive away. The Volkswagen Polo 85 TSI Life is priced from $29,490 before on-road costs, or between $32,400 and $33,600 drive away, depending on the state of registration. In recent months, it's been offered on special for $31,990 drive away nationwide. And when we filmed this video, the MG3 Hybrid Plus Essence was priced from $29,990 before on-road costs, or at $32,000 drive away, depending on the state and territory registration. But since then, MG has rolled out special drive away offers to push the price closer to $31,000 drive away nationwide. Standard features in all three include LED headlights, alloy wheels, touchscreens with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, AM, FM and DAB digital radio, leather steering wheels, partially or entirely fabric seats, rear parking sensors, auto emergency braking and lane keep assist. There are plenty of differences, however. The Suzuki lacks rain sensing wipers, tyre pressure monitors and a front centre armrest, but it's the only car here with wireless Apple CarPlay and heated front seats. The Volkswagen lacks blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, keyless entry and start, and auto climate control, but it has front parking sensors and some of the little conveniences that make driving a little bit easier, like 4 auto up-down windows and side mirrors that auto tilt when you put the car in reverse gear. Meanwhile, the MG misses out on wireless phone charging, but no other car can match its 360-degree camera, sunroof, genuine rear seat air vents, the size of its touchscreen, or its 10-year warranty, compared to 5 years of the Volkswagen and the Suzuki. For the full breakdown on what each car has, check out the written component of this comparison at the link in the description below. If you're in the market for a new or used car, we have thousands of examples for sale on Drive Marketplace across the country from trusted dealers. Check that out right now.
Alex, I've got a question. How do we actually know that people like these videos and comparisons in particular?
Well, they have to hit the thumbs up button down below. It tells us that you like this kind of content and that not every car needs to be an SUV. City cars still have a place, and we want to know that you like this kind of content. Boot capacities are claimed at 293 litres for the MG, 351 litres for the Polo, and 265 litres for the Swift, all behind the rear seats. In the real world, a full-size suitcase will fit in the boots of all three cars. However, there is a difference between quite a comfortable fit in the Polo and quite a snug fit in the Suzuki. Now, all these cars have lights in their boots as well as bag hooks, just for storing bags and things like that, so they don't roll around after you've gone shopping. Now, the Volkswagen and Suzuki have 60-40 split folding rear seats. You can still carry someone in the back seats while fitting a longer item as well, but the MG does not have that. This backrest folds in a single piece, and it does require two people to do it. There's latches on the back seat, press it, fold it down, and yeah, that's pretty rare and not something we really like to see in a small car in 2024, Sam.
Yeah, that's right. You can see that it's actually not a fully flat load space, but I think the main problem here is that if you do want to fit something bigger in the back, you now have only a two-seater. With the other cars, you can actually fit a third person in the back there whilst having a bit of extra room. But Alex, I want to show you something over here in this Polo. I do like this two-position floor to give you a bit of extra space when you need it, but the crown for me is this, a full-size spare wheel. It's on a steel wheel, not on an alloy. But I've got to say, this for me is a bit of a safety thing, I suppose, especially in this segment. There's lots of nails and screws around town. This, for me, 100% better than a goo kit, which is what you get in the other two cars.
That's right, and sometimes a puncture repair kit isn't enough to fix a particularly big puncture around town. The spare wheel is always better than not having one.
100%. We're in the inside of the Volkswagen Polo, and while this is one of the oldest cars in the segment, I think this feels like one of the bests on the inside still. And it comes down to, I think, just the level of quality in terms of the materials and the fit and finish overall. There's a sense of quality here in this Polo in terms of a lot of smaller details that puts it apart a little bit, I think, from the other two in this comparison. Now, infotainment is one area where I think this is good as well. This is the smallest screen out of the three, but in terms of the actual user experience, I would put this at number one. It's pretty well set up. It's got good fast load times and that sort of thing. And you've got a volume dial, which for me makes it much, much easier to use while you're driving around. Just the interface here between driving and using that, it is the best out of these three. Now, this isn't perfect overall, and in terms of spec, I suppose, value for money, we've got manual air conditioning here, no climate control, and you've still got good old-fashioned turnkey start as well. No push-button start in this model. But on the flip side of that, the digital display in front of the driver here feels good. The steering wheel in particular is a high point, I think. So even though this is a relatively basic car in terms of the specs, and it is a little bit more expensive overall, there's a sense of quality here, I think, which is really important and adds to the value of the Polo. This is the interior of the Suzuki Swift. This is the cheapest car out of the three in terms of asking price, but there are a lot of strong things going on here still. Now, number one for me is separate climate controls. They're not run through the infotainment display. You've got standalone buttons and switches here to operate your single zone climate control, and that just tends to work a lot better overall. It's easy to use while you're driving around and that sort of thing. In terms of tech, this car does present quite well. We've got the most amount of power outlets here. We've got a wireless charging pad. We've also got wireless Apple CarPlay via this infotainment display. Now, this has been pretty good overall. One small foible for me, however, is the fact that we don't have a volume dial. We do have these buttons here, which you kind of need to mash to get the volume up and down quickly, which isn't as good as the Polo in particular, which does have a volume dial. Now, in terms of storage, we don't have that much room going on here. There's no center storage bin here, so no spot for your elbow to rest. We do have heated seats, however, which is nice. But if you want to put something like your wallet or your handbag somewhere, it's kind of got to go in front of this handbrake here. So in terms of storage, it's not that good, but tech, it is good. Now, in terms of general ambience overall, this probably feels a little bit behind the others in terms of fit and finish. Some of the materials are a little bit scratchy and basic. You've got analog dials in front of the driver here instead of a digital display overall. The steering wheel feels pretty good, and it's quite spacious and airy in terms of the windscreen. I suppose being a little bit more upright. Visibility is good. You feel like you do have good space here, but I think the Swift is just a little bit let down by the materials in comparison to the other two. This is the interior of the MG3, and in this test car we've actually got a white interior, and it is a real point of difference, I think, in comparison to the other two cars in this test that are mostly black on the inside. This feels a bit lighter and a little bit different, I suppose, although I've got to say the combination of cloth and faux leather on these seats is probably going to take a little bit more time and effort to keep clean in comparison to others over the longer term. But in terms of the interior, I think this MG presents really nicely overall. You've got this combination of faux leather, a bit of stitching, and a bit of detail here on the dash. It looks fresh, it feels pretty good, and you've got a big infotainment display in comparison to the others that does work quite well. There's a lot of features going on, although it does have its problems. And one of them comes down to, in this test car at least, the smartphone mirroring while you're trying to do climate control. Let me explain. If you're driving along, you've got your phone plugged in, navigation, something like that, you do have a shortcut here for climate, which is a great thing to have. But when you're mirroring either Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, this button doesn't work. So you then have to go home, then press that button, do your climate, and then press home, and then press the mirroring button once again. So it's just a bit imperfect in terms of the implementation. It does really hold this car back, I think, a little bit in comparison to the others. Now, you don't get a wireless charging pad like you do in the others, but you do get a sunroof in this model, which is pretty good value for money and really good if you are into that kind of thing. And in terms of storage, you've got a small center bin here, which kind of moves into this area as well. You've got a lidded little storage area here as well. So this is a little bit versatile, works pretty well. You've got a rotary dial here in this car in comparison to the others. Something you get used to while driving, I think, but it looks a little bit more modern, I suppose. Now, one more thing to talk about is this steering wheel. It's quite a big steering wheel overall. Looks modern and fresh, and you've got lots of controls on there, but if you want to adjust the position of it, it's tilt only, no reach. Even though this is a new model, that feels like a bit of a miss for MG in terms of bringing out a new model and not including that feature. But otherwise, I've got to say, it's reasonably comfortable to drive in terms of the ergonomics and driving position, but the main strength of it, I think, is the presentation overall. Here's the second row of the Polo, and on balance, this would be the most spacious of all three in terms of space in the second row. Now, that's my driving position up front there. I'm around 180 centimeters tall, and I've got a little bit of legroom left over there actually for space. Now, I've got a bit of toe room as well, and these seats are actually reasonably comfortable in the back here. There's a bit of bolstering going on. I can sit comfortably, but the person in the middle, well, all three of these cars aren't going to be the most spacious in terms of having three adults across the middle here, but this is made a little bit worse by the transmission tunnel. Don't really know why this car has a transmission tunnel, but it does. Now, there's no air vent in the back of this car. There are two USB-C power outlets, no drop-down armrest either, but we do have a couple of lights up on the roof here, which is pretty handy. But overall, if space is important, this Polo does rank well. Here's the second row of the Swift, and this is the smallest car out of the three in terms of the comparison, and although there isn't a whole lot in it, this is the tightest in terms of legroom. Now, that's my driving position up front there. Once again, I'm around 180 centimeters tall, and I've got a little bit of legroom left over. It's worth pointing out that I do sit relatively close to the steering wheel, but this seat, I think, is a little bit more flat and bench-like in comparison to the Polo in particular. I don't think it's as comfortable overall, and we are a bit lacking in features here as well. So we've got no air vents, we've got no power outlets, we've got no map pockets either. So we've got one cup holder in the front here to fight over, we've got room for a bottle in the door, only a bottle, that is all. And that's about it in the back of this Swift here. So while it's fit for purpose and good enough, I don't think it's the best in terms of the experience for those who sit in the back. Now, out of all three cars in this comparison, the MG3 is the only one to have air vents in the second row. That is a major plus, I think, for this car overall. If you want your passengers in the back to be a little bit more comfortable with some aircon, you do have one USB power outlet there, and you got map pockets, you got a bit of storage in the doors and that sort of thing. So the MG does rate quite well in that regard. Now, in terms of space, once again, that's my driving position up front there. This is similar to the Polo in terms of legroom overall, a little bit better than the Suzuki. Toe room is perhaps a little bit limited, and headroom is slightly tight as well because this roof kind of tapers down a little bit. Now, I did bang my head getting into this car, into the back a couple of times at the start. I think I maybe got used to it, so let's call that user error perhaps. But one thing that I do like about this car in the back is the sense of width you get. This car is a bit wider in terms of exterior dimensions overall, and you can sense a little bit of extra width going on here. So even though none of these cars are great for being a five-seater, this is probably the best out of the three in that regard. I think this MG scores quite solidly overall, even though it's a little bit tight for headroom and maybe toe room, but I think that's a minor complaint in an otherwise good second row.
Powering the MG3 Hybrid Plus is a 75 kilowatt, 1.5 litre four-cylinder engine and a 100 kilowatt electric motor, which claims to develop 155 kilowatts combined, sent through a 3-speed automatic transmission to the front wheels. The battery capacity is 1.83 kilowatt hours, and as with all cars here, it needs 95 octane premium unleaded fuel. The MG is the most powerful car on this test. MG says 155 kilowatts from the 1.5 litre engine as well as the electric motor working together. And on paper, it could be a little hot hatch in disguise. The company claims 8 seconds from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour. That's pretty brisk for a city hatch, but in our testing, it stopped the clocks in 7.2 seconds. That is honestly pretty close to hot hatch material. That's quick as a turbo Suzuki Swift Sport hot hatch, and not far off, say, a Hyundai i20N and some other truly high performance machines. Because this car is a full hybrid rather than a mild hybrid like the Suzuki, it has a much bigger battery and it recuperates energy both under braking from the wheels as you decelerate, as well as from the petrol engine when that battery gets low. When the battery is full, this is a swift car. There's more than enough punch for zipping into gaps in traffic or overtaking on the freeway. But that's where some of the rough edges in the drivetrain of this car do start to appear. The car does let the battery get really, really low at some times, often down to 1 bar on the energy flow diagram on the dashboard. That means you have a lot less power in reserve when you go to put your foot down for an overtake. At times driving this car, as I said, we've had the battery go down to 1 bar on the dash, put our foot down, and the car is showing it only has about 30 or 40 kilowatts to spare compared to 130 when the car is running at its best with a full battery. That means there's a really big difference between the performance of the car with a full battery and an empty battery. And until you put your foot down, you have no real way of knowing, say you're about to pull out on an overtake on a country road, how much power the car is going to give you. It's quite frustrating how inconsistent this car can be. Since we tested these cars, MG has confirmed a software update is in development for the MG3 Hybrid, intended to address some of the power loss issues we experienced on this comparison. Another quirk of the hybrid system in the MG3 is when you're overtaking on a country road, for example, and you pull out and put your foot down for a couple seconds, it doesn't initially give you all the power the car has to offer. Initially gives you enough punch, sure, to complete the overtake, but if you hold it there for, say, 2-3 seconds with a fair bit of force on the accelerator pedal, it'll suddenly give you everything, like almost you've hit a nitrous button in a video game or like a turbo boost button. It's really bizarre, and it's just a quirk that MG really needs to work out and could iron out in its hybrid tech that other brands, say Toyota and Hyundai, don't have in their hybrid models. The steering is another area of improvement in this MG. For the most part, it is generally heavy for a city car, especially compared to the Suzuki and the Volkswagen, but it can be a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes you turn into a corner and the steering is a bit lighter than you expect. Again, not the end of the world, and you can get used to it in some regards. That's something that the Suzuki and the Volkswagen don't have. Their steering is more consistently light all the time, which is great in a car that spends most of its time around town. The ride of the MG is the least comfortable of this trio, though not by much. It can jitter over some nasty bumps around town and has a firmer edge than some may like. Though we're talking small margins here, the Polo and Swift are the most comfortable, with this car only a little bit less supple around town. In terms of handling on a winding road, this car does trail the other cars in this test as well. The MG tyres aren't amazing, they're Kumo tyres, and there is a fair bit of body roll, more so than you expect from a little hatchback that's in this kind of category. But still, it's not terrible, and there's enough confidence and road holding ability that it's not going to feel out of its depth if you do take this car outside city limits. In the MG, you get 3 modes of regenerative braking. That means the electric motor will slow the car down when you lift off the accelerator pedal. None of them are a full one-pedal mode like you get in an electric car, where you can lift off the accelerator pedal and just bring the car to a full halt without having to touch the brake pedal. That said, mode 3 of 3 is still pretty strong, and there's enough customization here to tune the car exactly how you like and how much regen you want in this vehicle. Now, the MG on the highway is pretty well suppressed in terms of road and wind noise. There's a little bit of wind noise at 110 kilometers an hour, but tyre noise for the most part is reasonably well kept under control. Overall, this is not a terrible car to drive. It's actually a pretty decent car, especially compared to the old generation MG3 that this car replaces. But a car has to come third on the road in this comparison, and in that case it is this MG3. There are some inconsistencies in both the hybrid tech as well as the steering that we're not quite a fan of, and some things to think MG to work on in a future version of this model. Powering the Volkswagen Polo Life is a 1-litre turbo 3-cylinder petrol engine with 85 kilowatts and 200 newton meters, sent to the front wheels through a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission. This Polo is the most refined car to drive out of this trio. It has a very big car feel on the road about it. It feels bigger than it is. Not in terms of size, but in terms of how quiet it is, how composed it feels on the road. This is very much like a Golf or a larger car in Volkswagen's range rather than a small, affordable city hatch. This 1-litre turbo engine in the Polo is a fantastic unit. It's got plenty of punch, especially in the middle of the rev range. It makes a really nice thrummy note that we associate with 3-cylinder engines. However, it's slowed down a little bit by this transmission. Coming to a full stop, you can see when you sort of set off, it does tend to labour and hesitate a little bit. It's a common behaviour of dual-clutch automatic gearboxes like one in this Polo. But for a car that spends a lot of its time in city traffic, stop-start, and you're going to be experiencing that a lot, yeah, it's not fantastic and definitely not as good as a CVT in the Suzuki as an example. It can also be a little bit slow to react when you ask for a burst of power on the move, but for the most part, it is pretty slick once the car is rolling, and you can learn to drive around some of its quirks. The Polo is the most supple of this trio, which may be a surprise given European cars tend to have a firmer feel over bumps, but this car has smaller wheels and chubbier tyres than the Swift and the MG3. It's not a magic carpet, and you can still feel small bumps here and there, but it's supple and the most composed over city streets in this test. And it is actually a really enjoyable car to drive too. Got really light and easy steering. The suspension is fantastic in corners. It's very balanced, feels composed. It doesn't really feel upset by bumps in a corner. Really fun to drive and the best car to drive on the winding road that we have on test here today. Something you notice on getting into the Polo for the first time are the brakes are quite sensitive and a little bit grabby. This won't be for everyone, but we found that we do get used to it over time the more we drove these cars. And actually, our testers came to appreciate it, particularly compared to Suzuki, which does need quite a bit of pedal effort to make it pull up, even for just, say, the traffic lights. Up to you. Obviously, your taste may differ. Let us know in the comments below if, say, a more sensitive brake pedal is something that will be an issue for you choosing one of these cars. Other things to call out, this car is quite quiet on the freeway at higher speeds. A little bit of tyre noise, but it's not too bad. You can just drown it out with that stereo. And that steering, as I said, it's great on a winding road, but it's also really good in the city. It's light, it's predictable, and also really direct and well weighted. There's no complaints at all with that. And overall, this is just a really, really compliant, quite a composed and easy car to drive. Definitely the best car on the road out of this group. Powering the Swift Hybrid is a 1.2 litre non-turbo 3-cylinder petrol engine, developing 61 kilowatts and 112 newton meters, matched with a continuously variable automatic transmission. It's a mild hybrid with a 2.3 kilowatt, 60 newton meter electric motor that can assist the engine, as well as a 0.12 kilowatt hour battery pack to store its energy. The Swift has the least powerful engine of this trio, and you can feel that on the road. There's enough punch for around town driving, and it is generally okay at lower speeds. But when you ask more of the car, whether you're trying to overtake someone or merge onto a freeway, it does start to strain and run out of puff. There's also quite a bit of noise too, both from the engine itself as well as that CVT transmission, which is smooth around town, as with the engine, but does keep the revs quite high when you're accelerating with vigor, as CVTs tend to do, and it does bring a fair bit of noise into the cabin. Suzuki calls the Swift a hybrid, but in reality it's just a mild hybrid, and a very, very mild one at that. The electric motor is very small, so it can't drive the wheels on electricity alone, nor can it add much of a boost to performance while you're moving. The only place you really notice it is with the auto stop-start technology that turns the engine off when you stop the traffic lights and turns it back on when you start moving. But that's something the Polo and the MG have as well, and the Polo isn't a hybrid, so that's not tech that is only exclusive to hybrid vehicles. Now, I will say, even though it doesn't drive like a hybrid, it does use fuel like a hybrid. We've been seeing economy in the region of 4 to 5 litres per 100 kilometres on this test. We'll talk about fuel economy more in a moment. What the Swift does have on its side is weight. This car is a few hundred kilograms lighter than the Polo and the MG, and you can feel that even at city speeds. It's keener to turn into corners, and doesn't feel as slow as its on-paper power deficit may suggest because it is so light. If you live on a really tight street, this Swift is the best car of the bunch. Has the smallest turning circle, the visibility is the best, not by much, but it is a little bit better than the Polo, and the steering is really light and easy at city speeds. Something we're not so keen on are the brakes. The pedal does require quite a bit of force to get the car to pull up. It's not sensitive at the top of the travel like you might expect. It also means it's not grabby in traffic, but you do the first time you drive the car, find yourself approaching a corner and realizing you need to put a lot more force on the brake pedal. You get used to it, I'm sure, but just something worth noting. At higher speeds, there is a fair amount of tyre and wind noise. Not too much that you can't drown it out with a stereo, but something to keep in mind that the Polo and the MG are better in that regard if you plan to do longer distances outside the city. But at the end of the day, these cars are designed to be city vehicles, not long-distance cruisers or sports cars. And that's where the Swift really excels, with its small footprint, light and easy steering, the engine that's enough for around-town driving, and just generally nimble and quite fun character. None of these cars are what you'd call thirsty on fuel, but there was a surprising difference in fuel use in our testing. On screen now are the claimed fuel consumption figures for each car, as well as what we saw over a mix of city, highway and country road driving across these three vehicles. They all need 95 or 98 octane premium unleaded, which will add to running costs. Where further differences appear is in safety. All vehicles here are fitted as standard with autonomous emergency braking, lane keep assist, rear view cameras and rear parking sensors. But while the Polo is the only car here with 7 airbags, compared to 6 of the others, it misses out on blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, adaptive cruise control, lane centering assist and traffic sign recognition. Despite that, the Polo is the only car here with a 5-star ANCAP safety rating, based on 2022 testing. The MG3 earned 3 stars, while the Swift was slapped with just 1 star in Australian safety testing, losing marks across both how well they protect occupants in a crash and how well their technology can prevent a collision. That 1-star score for the Australian market Swift is down from 3 stars for the European version under the same criteria, and performed worse in physical crash tests locally, indicating the Australian model is not as safe in a crash as its overseas counterpart. It must be said the Polo was crash tested to 2022 ANCAP criteria, rather than the newer and more stringent 2024 standards of the other two, so there's no guarantee it would earn 5 stars if tested again today.
Well, we've got 3 city cars here, and when you weigh up the strengths and weaknesses of each of these 3 options, I think in comparison to what people want, you can mount an argument almost for each of these cars to have a bit of an advantage, don't you think?
Yeah, that's right. This was a much closer test than we thought coming into this comparison, but of course there can only be one winner, and conversely, one of these cars does have to come third.
In this test, it's the Swift.
This car really surprised our judges on this test. It has a charming character, it's the most frugal car here, it's the cheapest as well, and it's refreshingly simple and light in today's age of complex modern cars. However, it lacks the space, technology and performance to compete with the best. And ultimately, it's that disappointing 1-star safety rating that holds the Swift back and makes it difficult to recommend for what could be someone's first car. Second place goes to the MG. If you plan to keep your car for more than 5 years, this is the one to buy. It has the longest feature list, the most technology, plenty of space inside, and it's the quickest on paper. But that 3-star safety rating is subpar, and the driving experience isn't as polished as we'd like. While there is a non-hybrid version available, it's not as frugal as this one, and not all of our complaints behind the wheel are related to that hybrid system. There are also a few corners cut inside in terms of the ergonomics and the operation of its technology. But our winner today is the Volkswagen Polo Life.
I know, this old girl just keeps going, doesn't it? It's not a perfect car overall though. It does have some issues in terms of spec, safety, and also I think the cost of ownership does put it ahead of the others in a bad way. But there really is a lot to like about this car, isn't there?
That's right, it's the roomiest inside, it has the biggest boot of this bunch, it's the only one with a spare wheel as well, it's worth calling out. But also it's just really nice to drive on the road, it's comfortable over bumps, handles the best of these trios, it's just a really relaxing, quite a refined car to drive. It feels like you're getting a bigger car in a small package rather than a cheap car that's been made to feel a little bit fancy. That's why it's our winner of this comparison. If you're on the fence between a city hatchback and a city SUV, click up there to watch our comparison review of the Toyota Yaris Hybrid against the Toyota Yaris Cross Hybrid. See which is best for you and your lifestyle.